Okay.
Morning.
Good morning. Can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
What you got down there? That looks scary.
The only thing I can think of is sometimes if you have things like want to turn.
Oh, I will. Yeah, we don't get the Twilight Zone echo. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, we got it. Now we know. Oh, yeah.
I'm feeling good so
Oh,
far.
okay.
But you know, like, I feel like sometimes I've had this experience. She might tune in, and then she's gonna be here in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
You're definitely one. I haven't done it in a while.
Well,
I realize.
did you know outlet? Nice, so that's very
Okay. One second, I'm just signing in online. Well.
Things in here, like messy things in here. Sandwich, chips.
Yeah, every single little crinkle, chew, swallow will be heard, just like. Well, that's like in my committee.
And I'm definitely doing it. Even better.
I was thinking we could build in a break though, that's 3 hours without a break.
Oh, yeah, I actually
Because I haven't eaten and so.
just realized that I accidentally left that open. Hopefully nothing.
Okay.
Well, also congratulations.
Okay, I think we have a quorum. Sarah, do you want to get us started today?
Sure, I can. I would love to hear who is in the room. You're all very tiny.
And we have someone new representing the HCB, so we'll.
Maybe let's do
her-
yeah, we could do intros maybe this morning.
Do you want to start on the computer and then we can come or
Sure.
start in
Yeah.
the virtual space?
Yes, I can definitely do that. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Sarah Russell. I'm the Special Assistant to End Homelessness for the City of Burlington and one of the co-chairs for this task force. Next, I will go to Miranda.
Thanks, Sarah. Miranda Graham, the Deputy Commissioner for the Economic Services Division. I'll go to Frank.
Hey everyone, Frank Knack with the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. I guess pass it to the room.
Okay. I am Jubilee McGill. I am one of the co-chairs. And I am one of the members with lived experience.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Elise Greaves. I'm the Housing Stewardship Coordinator at VHCB, and I'm actually sitting in today for Jenny Hislop, who was at a meeting with Representative Balint. She wishes she could be here.
Amy Johnson. I'm the representative for Vermont Care Partners.
Lily Sojourner, and I'm the representative for Commissioner Chris Winters with the Department for Children and Families.
Brenda Siegel. I am the representative for Vermont Center for Independent Living and the executive director of End Homelessness Vermont.
And that is everyone in the room, Sarah.
Okay, let's go to Elizabeth.
Hello, Elizabeth Gilman, United Ways of Vermont, Vermont 211.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And Chris?
Christopher Loris, live in the city of Rutland. I am the representative of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and I somehow disappeared myself, and I'm trying desperately to reappear. I may need to rejoin.
Okay, well, it's a great green color for you
Yes.
this morning, Chris.
Yes,
I don't
ma'am.
know. It's impressive that you pulled that off. So
Yeah, impressive indeed. Yeah.
okay. I think unless there is anyone, is there anyone representing the Department of Commerce and Community Development this morning? Okay.
Sean may have been out, but I'm not.
Alex Farrell did reach out to Sarah and I and said they are working to get someone who can join us for the remainder of the meeting. So hopefully starting the next one, we'll have someone.
Great. Okay, so those are our task force members here with us this morning. Moving along with the agenda, we need to approve minutes from both the August 27th meeting and the September 7th meeting. Both of those documents are posted on the website. I'm assuming everyone was able to take a look at those. Let's start first with approving the August 27 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. This is Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Miranda.
Thanks, Miranda. Any discussion or edits regarding the minutes as posted? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes for the August 27th meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm gonna absent. I wasn't at those meetings. Yeah.
Thanks, Elise. Okay, moving on to the September 17th minutes. Was there somebody else talking?
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was your name again?
Elise.
Elise.
Yeah.
I don't know if you said Louise there, or maybe I just heard Louise. Or maybe not.
Okay, sounds like a lot.
Elise, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I was clear on Elise's name.
All right, moving on to the September 17th minutes as posted on the website. Can we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. This is Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. Is there a second?
Loris will second.
Thank you. Any discussion or edits about those minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the September 17th minutes as posted, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions?
Elise Greaves.
Thank you, Elise. Okay, great. Thanks all. Now we'll go ahead and open up our public forum portion of the meeting. I did not receive any signups or any outreach from folks who wanted to speak ahead of time during the meeting, but that is not required. So we'll go ahead and open public forum. Is anyone online or in the room wishing to speak during public forum this morning?
Not in the room. It doesn't appear to be any.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands on the screen. So with that, we will go ahead and close public forum and move into reviewing an assessment of our progress on the directives. So I'm just gonna actually pull that. I didn't realize that I did not pull that up before we came here. So on September 25th, 5th, Jubilee and I represented the task force at the Joint Fiscal Committee to provide an update about where some of the discussion that we have been having around the directives that were assigned within Act 113. We provided an update that included discussion being focused on eligibility criteria, length of stay within the program, the coordinated entry system, touching on the role of the Agency of Human Services and shelter provision, and were provided with a history, or I guess a historical look at the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program from pre-pandemic to current. I shared about the presentations and some level setting that we were provided as a group. And then also gave some more specific updates about the directives. Something that I want to note that Jubilee and I noted really clearly in this report was that no decisions had been made, that we had not voted on recommendations at this time, but that we largely had discussion around many of the directives. So some of the areas where we had some sense of agreement on was that there is in fact a statewide unified coordinated entry system, and that the system must be improved to include benchmarks and be tied to funding for providers. There was some level of agreement that the Agency of Human Services and its contractors should engage with and participate within the coordinated entry system, including the HMIS system. We talked about different contractors working for Agency of Human Services and departments such as Economic Services, Dale, Family Services, DMH, and the Department of Health. In addition to contractors including the AAAs, designated mental health agencies, and substance use designated agencies. We also shared with the group that there was some discussion around the role of AHS shifting from a program administrator role to a shelter provider role with regard to the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program, and what accountability for participants within that shelter program might look like. And also the need for providing data and statewide reports as well as regional reports. We talked about, just going through my notes here, we will hopefully be receiving a full report that details the scale and type of emergency shelter required to meet the needs across the state. And Frank is working on that right now. Although I want to note that I think that some of that is shifting a little bit because of the motel exits, and those were really dependent on maintaining some level of current of capacity within the general assistance program. There was awareness that each region currently has a lead agency for administration of the coordinated entry system. There was also some agreement that the role of the coordinated entry system lead agency and administrator must be really clearly defined. We have not talked in depth, but I think that there has been some discussion around the adverse weather conditions and the lack of reduced eligibility requirements that are being implemented this year, and the impacts of what we worry we will see. And then some of the challenges that we presented were the expedited timeline for this work, only having 8 meetings to go through all of these directives. We have to date lacked participation from some key stakeholders and task force members to carry out real thorough and expertise discussion around some of the housing regulation issues. and that there will certainly be some recommendation that more time will be required to fully focus on all of the directives that were given to the task force. So that being said, that is a real quick overview, of some of the things that we shared during the Joint Fiscal Committee meeting. Jubilee, did you want to touch on anything else that we shared during that meeting?
No, I think that's a good summary. I guess it would be nice to hear people's feedback. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that. So just wanting to make sure that's people's kind of perspectives of what we covered, or if there's more that we have to go back and discuss.
I'm not seeing any hands online.
Nothing in the room either.
Okay. Great. So moving on then to kind of the meat of our agenda today is really going to be focused on discussing program eligibility, length of eligibility, and the notification to households and communication recommendations that we have. And I think that how we, Jubilee and I met late last week to kind of talk through how we wanted to structure this, that we were hoping for folks to use this time to make and discuss recommendations. I think, Jubilee, we wanted to ensure that everyone had a chance to talk today. I think that there's some members of the task force that we would love to hear from that we haven't yet, who have real unique perspective. So with that, I think Jubilee, I will count on you in the room to sort of create a queue of folks who would like to speak, and I can do the same for the folks who are joining virtually, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So is there preference amongst the group of whether to begin with program eligibility, length of eligibility, or notification and communication? Any recommendations around that? Either of all three of those, where would we like to start?
I have one around eligibility. This is Jubilee.
Go ahead. We can start there.
Yeah, this is, I know we kind of, and I don't know if we want to pick up kind of going back between the H79 and the budget bill, but this was an entire kind of segment of folks that have been left out, but kind of in thinking big picture about prevention. I've been examining, we're doing a lot of year-end data for my work, and I know the COC is as well, and the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness who have been in DCF custody foster care is just staggering. And so I would like to recommend that we add a new eligibility category for youth and young adults who are exiting foster care. We have our extended care, and it's a great program. We have our YHDP program, which I administer, and we're in the same room with the YDP folks, but the resources aren't enough. And so these youth are, especially if they're over 19, are going into really unsafe situations, and it's really like we're sentencing them, if you look at the statistics, to a life of chronic homelessness. So I don't, this came out of a conversation at the end of the day yesterday with Jesse Warren, who's the director of the Youth Development Program. So I will work on getting some language, but I just like to see how people feel about that. It would probably be something like, if there are no YDP resources or other resources available to them, that when they're exiting care, that they be eligible to go into the stability of the GA emergency housing program.
Are you thinking under 22? What's the,
The YDP goes up until their 23rd birthday. So I would probably say like, you know, up until like a year after that, because for that transition and stability.
So you would use the YDP eligibility?
Jesse is sending me some things, so that's why I don't have it fully. He's also going to show us some, he's compiling some data for me as well that I'll be able to send out to folks. But I figured since we have a meeting today, I'd get people's thoughts because it's not a traditional category we have included, but we know that looking at the data, an overwhelming number of people experiencing homelessness as an adult, especially chronic homelessness, have been in care at some point in their life.
And Homelessness Vermont's data, as we talked about last time, also shows the same thing. And so we would definitely, I think VCIL would definitely support that. And we're also finding that it's people with disabilities, especially living with learning disabilities, that are in that category or that age range that are having a really challenging time at finding housing. So I think this would be supportive.
Vermont Care Partners also supports this as agencies that are working with youth, often with co-occurring disorders. This is a challenge, a barrier that we've been experiencing for a long time. Also working in the VCRIP program was something that I was personally connected to, and very challenging to find placement for youth. So yes, in support.
I also support this. I think that, you know, as we talk about kind of like what's happening right now, it's also important to, you know, talk about prevention. And I really like that you touched on that. So I would strongly support this. My question, I guess, would maybe be more for Miranda or Nicole. I've heard that youth in this age range have a real difficult time accessing motel rooms because there are age requirements that you have to be 25 years or older. Do you see that as a barrier to being able to serve this? Not that we shouldn't include that in the eligibility. I'm just thinking through how that might work practically speaking. Are you seeing that as well? And if yes, are there workarounds, or how do you manage that from a administration standpoint?
Thanks, Sarah. That's a great question. And I actually had just pinged Nicole too, to just say, do we have a hard time with housing individuals? So I was going with age 21, and she really said like the age is 18 and above. You know, it's like that we don't have a problem. It's like below that we would have challenges. So I don't think the age is a challenge. I do think the space, you know, like I don't want to be the skunk at the garden party, as people say, but I just think it's like as we add, we know that we have a limited number of rooms. So we're still going to have to get into the like, is it a conversation about, is it just like first come, first serve? And I will tell you, there's a lot of feelings right now about that I think everybody's aware of. And so if we keep adding groups, it just means that overall we're going to have more folks who could potentially be eligible, but they aren't going to have space because we have a limited number of rooms. And then there's also I think if we want to add, we also have to talk about what is that potentially that fiscal component. It's like, what is, forgive me, Julie, I'm forgetting who you said was going to get you more information, but do they have a sense of like how many people that is, how long would they need to before they would be able to transition to something else? Are we talking about having something else for them to bridge to? Because I think we all know that staying in a motel long-term really isn't a great solution. So what is that ultimate goal? to be able to kind of like catch people, but then have somewhere else for them to go. And then what is that fiscal impact going to be? Because I think we're going to have to outline that as well if there is a recommendation that would go in.
Can I switch to the procedural question to you, maybe Jubilee / Sarah? That's really good information to have. And that seems like that part of it would be worked out. The recommendation can be there and that part of it can be worked out with the legislature. Am I on the right trajectory there?
Can I ask a related question?
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for me to know today, is the goal to make decisions on this, or is the goal to talk through it and then circle back? Because I do think that there are certain pieces of the charges that are related. And so, for instance, it might be hard to kind of, because I think this came up in our earlier meeting too, like make decisions for everyone, maybe not for all, but maybe for some of us, to make decisions or recommendations based on, like, say, eligibility, when we haven't yet had maybe like the capacity discussion. And so I don't know, I guess I think like people might make different decisions or recommendations if it was like, well, we have to vote today, but then there's this other kind of recommendation looming that, oh, wait, now that we've made this other recommendation, I want to go back and change, so I don't know if there's a thought on today. Yeah.
For this particular one, I just was bringing it to you. I am going to get data that gives a better sense of numbers. It was more of a temperature check.
So it sounds like today we're just continuing to talk through eligibility, and then maybe at a later date, we would look at all the recommendations potentially that have been composed and come back.
And find the areas where we have consensus and the ones we don't. And then I think then we'll be able to, once we get through these sections, I have a list of the kind of eligibility we agreed on and the ones we didn't, and I can go over that if that's helpful, that we can circle back to. And so this was just another potential I was adding to that with more information to come.
Jubilee, do you want to go through that list of eligibility that you've identified consensus?
Sure. Yeah. So we had Frank had that document. I've got it in front of me, just printed out. It starts on page 10, kind of as H879s that pass through the House. We all agreed on the 60 years of age or older, or there were a lot. We agreed that we would come back to the section around disability. There was recommendations of doing a self-certification, and there was not a consensus there. I think we did agree that written verification from Social Security Administration and some form of the disability variance were things we all agreed on. Number 3, around medical conditions, there was a recommendation that the term healthcare facility also be specified, that this includes a residential treatment facility, which we talked about but didn't really come to a consensus on. Number 4, 19 and under, the age, we all agreed that if a household has a child 19 or under, they would be eligible. We agreed on a household with a pregnant member. And then we agreed to add death of a spouse, partner, and then adding a child or parent to that. But that to limit or tie it to causing their homelessness. And then the last one we got to number 7 around natural disaster. And there was a consensus to remove the 30 days. but we didn't get around, but there were some folks who did feel that there should be some kind of time limit. We didn't identify one. So I think that might be where we kind of pick up and see if we can identify a day limit before we move on to the next one, or choose to kind of have people think about recommendations and we can vote. That can be one of the ones we vote on next time. So that's what I have for my notes.
And just to be, I mean, we didn't vote last time.
No.
So I think it was more, so that's where maybe there wasn't like, I don't know if agree versus like momentum, because I don't think there was ever a time where we said yes or no. So I do think it would be helpful to know when we're gonna have to officially vote and what we're voting on. And again, maybe this is just me from a process perspective. I think it would be helpful to know what else we're gonna kind of make a recommendation on, so that we could see each recommendation in the larger context. Because again, I think to Miranda's point, as an example, there might be different choices people make around eligibility when then talking about capacity and other capacity recommendations.
We're gonna do program eligibility, and then we'll get into the, it's called like length of eligibility on the agenda. But that's really where we can talk about, now we have maximum number in hotels a night, as well as room caps. And so that's where we will go into that discussion. I think we'll keep moving through and see the areas where we seem to have agreement and then circle back. But we'll do all of the final voting once we've had a chance to discuss that, if that makes sense. Do you, Sarah, any thoughts?
I think, yeah, I definitely think that makes sense. I mean, I think that there's nothing precluding us from voting on, particular recommendations today. I did appreciate how you walked through kind of where we have agreement, and where we still need to find some group consensus. So I think that was really helpful feedback. I'm wondering, are there other, I want to add to Jubilee to that list, because I was writing as you were talking, the youth recommendation as well. Are there other thoughts that folks have, or does this just kind of gut check what Jubilee read off in terms of the areas where we have found agreement and consensus as a group? And do we have, I guess we'll start there. Does that feel accurate? I see on the screen Frank and then Miranda.
Hey y'all. Yeah, I guess I just have more of a process question. And I'm wondering if it would make sense, Jubilee, I'm not sure where all the points you just lifted up live, but if like we were to create like almost just like a spreadsheet with the charges, the issues, the recommendations, and had it all in a place where we all had access. And then kind of as we go through, knowing that we're not like formally voting, but basically we're doing like mini straw polls on the issues, and we can just highlight like where, the recommendation has been like via straw poll accepted or not accepted, or where there's been revisions, just so we have like a working document.
Yeah, I can do that when we're done today, this afternoon. I can put together a spreadsheet.
Or if you want to send me stuff, I'm happy to do it. Like whatever. I would just thought maybe that would be going forward.
In my notebook.
Cool.
Frank, if you want to take lead on that, I don't want to speak for Jubilee, but if you want to take lead on that, I think that's a great idea.
Okay,
I would
I'm
really
happy to do
appreciate that.
Yeah, and I can send it to you and Jubilee and just make sure it makes sense before it goes out.
Perfect.
Cool.
Miranda?
Thanks. And thank you, Frank. I appreciate that suggestion and having it in writing. And I guess I just want to put a finer point on what Lily was saying is, as members of the administration, we're going to need to see the whole package before we're able to say that we have agreement. And so I guess it's like that word that's making me slightly uncomfortable of just saying like, yes, we're having conversation and there might be things that we're open to, but the actual like agreement and yes, we can move forward with it. It's going to be something that we're going to have to look at it in its entirety. So I'm happy, Jubilee, with your proposal of like we can continue to go through. I just want to make sure for anybody who's watching this that it's understood that the administration is still saying like we aren't saying that yes, we officially agree with this because we need to see you know, what it means in its entirety because it is all interconnected, as we know.
Noted.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thanks.
Brenda,
Is this a time to offer other proposals, or do you want to go through the parts where we still need to discuss first? Sarah?
I think if you have a proposal or recommendation related to program eligibility, now would be the time to share that.
Okay, we, this is not just from me, so I don't know if Amy, it's from Amy and myself and Shelby, who will be here in a few minutes. There are a few parts of eligibility that we recommend. We came back to the ADA definition, and I think we should just discuss that when we discuss ADA potentially. Yeah, okay, disability in general, but just to outline it, that the ADA definition of disability is a federal standard, and identifying disability for is also the way that HUD defines it as well. And the decision on if a disability or medical condition warrants a need to be sheltered should be between a medical provider and the individual. So they're the most qualified to make those decisions. And so I think I would say I need to note that VCIL also feels that there has to be some other way to determine that's beyond medical provider in case, because that specifically marginalizes people who don't have medical providers. And I did hear from the executive director that was a concern. So I need to bring that into this. The other, we agree with access to use, we already said that. We actually supported a lot of the budget language with minor adjustments. But then the other two proposals are one is around income contribution and one is around resource tests. And fundamentally, we don't believe that there should be an income contribution because the majority of people who are in the program are having significantly low incomes in the first place, and that can make it harder to access permanent housing. However, if there is an income contribution, we are suggesting that the standard be followed that's similar to how Section 8 calculations of income contribution are, because we find that sometimes people are asked to contribute more than they would be asked to in a Section 8 housing choice voucher or in permanent housing or in, subsidized housing. And so it should follow that same standard. And I'm happy to provide that after this. I didn't have it on me right now. And then we have another model in which that money goes into a savings that can be used to access needs once people are permanently housed as an alternative to it going to hotels to supplement the incomes. We don't think that actually, I mean, we'd have to see the numbers from AHS and from joint fiscal, from JFO, but to know how much it actually calculates for a savings for the state, but it would be hugely beneficial to people in the program if that went towards their permanent housing. So that's income contribution. And I'll just say the last one and then we can. So the other is the resource test. A resource test was added in this last way that the way that the rules were created. And there's a lot of data that says resource tests are really harmful and continue the cycle of poverty. And I'm happy to provide this group with some of that data as well. And we believe that that there should be no resource test because it prevents access to permanent housing. It's hard to come up with a number. We had a meeting with the department, with legal aid in the department. It was hard to come up with a number of what a resource test could be because the situation just really changes depending on if someone lost their house in a flood and they need to put on a down payment on a house, or if they are, and we do not want people to drain their resources while they're in this emergency housing, because it ultimately derails the goal of getting them out and has us as a state spending more money. So those are our 3 recommendations. I think the disability definition is a longer conversation, but the income and resource test we thought went together. And again, that comes from Amy Shelby, who's not here, pointing to her empty chair, and myself.
Thanks, Brenda. Frank, I see your hand up.
Devin, I just want to say I absolutely agree with what Brenda just said around the resource tests and around the self-pay. And I think also we've heard not only on the self-pay, the kind of the difficulty it creates for the participants, but also hotel providers. We've heard concerns of getting paid one day from one and one day from another. It just creates unnecessary confusion on their side as well. So we would support that. Thanks.
I have a question about, and I think this would be a question for Miranda, or Nicole, maybe. I thought that the income contribution was 30% of the income, which aligns with the HUD rental assistance. Is that, have I misunderstood? And if yes, can you explain that piece a little bit further to us?
I'm certified. I've done a lot of HUD compliance and I do the income calculations. For HUD, there are a number of deductions that a household can get. So there can be deductions for child care, deductions, medical expenses, just having a child in the household. And then to HUD, you kind of do 2 calculations and then you take the higher. So HUD, it's broadly described as 30% of their income, but if they have a disability or children, it's often actually lower than that.
And
Okay.
I would add that where this got flagged was actually quite a while ago for me, because I was noticing that clients who had similar incomes to my income, when it was low, where I had a 0 income contribution of my rent with a Section 8 housing choice voucher, they would still have an income contribution that equaled significantly more than that. And so I was like, there's something off about the standard we're using. So that's where I first noticed it, actually.
Gotcha. Okay, I understand. I'm familiar with rent calculations. I wasn't thinking of the exemption of the exemptions and deductions. From an administrative point of view, Miranda or Nicole, can you weigh in on how something like that might work?
Are you looking to see how it's calculated now or how it could work differently?
Both.
Okay, so right now, we do 30%. It's a straight 30% above the reach up threshold. And so that's in the calculation. We don't do any additional deductions. And then it's based off whatever that dollar amount is. If it ends up being $100, then it'd be 1 room night. So it's based on the average hotel cost in the district. We always round down.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understand. So what I'm hearing you say is that right now it's a straight 30% of your income without those deductions above the reach up threshold. That's correct?
That's correct. And then rounded down to however many hotel nights that is. I will say that it's very common for me to get requests the beginning of the month, which is our most common time to have income contribution. If someone has a bill that they need to pay and they can't pay their income contribution, we will get requests and we will waive some of those self-pay nights.
How do you handle fluctuations in receiving or not receiving child support as income?
Child support, I would have to look at that and get back to you specifically.
Okay, I just know that that's a huge challenge with rental assistance with paying 30% is that if you don't receive your child support payment, you're still responsible for your rent. So I didn't know if you recalculate that on based on their monthly income, like how often do you sort of recertify what their income is?
It depends on how often they're getting paid. It really depends on how often they're getting paid. So if they get paid weekly, then we will do that weekly. If they get paid monthly, we'll do that monthly.
Okay. From your perspective, including exemptions like, medical exemption or, exemption for having, minor children, or childcare expenses, is that something that is, does that feel like, I mean, I don't want to say like manageable, but like how administratively would that work for you?
I think the challenge is always that the general assistance program, being an emergency program, is that we're trying to get people housed right away. And any kind of exemption would possibly be additional verification, which means potentially longer to make somebody eligible. And that's, I think, the challenging piece of any type of additional documentation we need to collect.
Okay.
I'm sure that Jubilee knows this as well, but I just want to, when I fill out my Section 8 recertification, it is still a calculation. It isn't necessarily needing additional documentation. It's very clear what is and is not needed. So I don't know that that would create any additional barriers to access. I think that it would actually increase access, and it would take into account the reality of surviving with low income.
It really depends.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my one thing about this is it's very complicated. Doing these calculations, you've got to do two. People have to have all of the documentation in the first place. It is a very heavy administrative lift. So yeah, I see both sides really of this.
I guess I'd like to bring in that calculation and some more for in the future. So another thing I'd like to add so that we can look at that and figure out how perhaps that could work, or what in between HUD and what's happening now could be a better representation if there's going to be an income contribution.
I think it would be helpful to kind of understand that. I'm wondering about the second piece that Brenda mentioned around the escrow. Well, you didn't say escrow, but I'm using that word. But I think this. I support this idea. I think that it is consistent with HUD's family self-sufficiency program, where folks who have rental assistance, once their income increases, as they're able to sort of build their income, then any additional amount that they are required to pay in rent goes into an escrow that they can then use for, educational purposes or a down payment on a home. And that, I think it's a very successful model. I would love to hear from Miranda or Nicole or Lily how that might work, what your vision for that could be if that was a recommendation that came out of this group.
I might kick that to Lily. I don't know if ESD would have the abilities to set up accounts to make sure that clients were able to get money into an escrow account. I think it'd have to be managed through partners, but I would yield to others on that.
Yeah, the closest thing is we do some shared savings accounts with family supportive housing as sort of like incentive and matching programs. It is, I mean, what they share with us is that's very challenging. It's very challenging to get banks to agree to work with them. It takes a lot of work for their business offices to do that. They really have to be on top of it with paperwork. You really have to, for instance, have everything figured out so that if, worst case scenario, somebody passes away, like, exactly what you're doing with the money. So our FSH partners do it. And I think they see a lot of value in what they do with the mini goals and the shared savings, but it is administratively an ongoing challenge for them, and I think they would all share that. And this is and this would be different. So I think that's a huge administrative issue that we would have to figure out how to tackle. And I think it becomes, again, pretty challenging to really track and make sure that that's going well, but I'm not an expert in this. And so, you know, I'd be curious if other people have other workarounds.
In my thought process, I think we knew that that would be an administrative challenge, and it would be better for the clients. And so I think that it's part of, like, when we're bringing in the HUD, or maybe thinking through that proposal a little, but also a place where maybe the legislature is going to have to dig a little deeper if we think that that's a good idea. And whether or not it can work is something that I think might take more work. I've also heard from additional partners about it. So I think that there's, and I want to add that, again, not bringing my own Section 8 into this, but our HUD, the Brattleboro Housing Authority has an exception to the HUD rules. I've brought this up before, that allows for there to be a lot of incentive towards savings and towards creating goals that I could see as incredibly valuable in this program. And so when we start to, but I feel like this weaves into program requirements, because it's much more self-directed goals and requirements rather than what we think people should do. And it is working to get people out of poverty. And so with this exception from the HUD guidelines. And so I just, I think that there's a little more deeper dive needed to figure out how that would be functionally. It's another place where I think the recommendation is what we think would be best, but not necessarily it's with the legislature that we're going to have to explore whether it's possible. I don't know if people have thoughts on the resource test piece, but that's confusing. So that's easy to do, to not have one. That's really easy administratively, actually. So I would think.
Is there currently that resource test in the eligibility right now?
Yes, there is.
And what is that?
There's a $0 income or resource threshold. We will allow some, if people have money that is already earmarked for certain items, then we will allow that. But currently there's no resource threshold. There's a $0 resource limit.
And where that's creating problems, obviously, is that we are having people come in who've had a flood, or we're having people come in who have savings, and now they've only have 80 days in shelter, and now they're having to spend down all their savings, and they have no way to get into housing, and they have no resources. Now, when they do, no furniture, no anything. So I think we understand the functional problem. And
yeah, I think that aligns like with Medicaid to have that, how you have if you have more than $2,000 in assets, then you have to spend that down. And I think for some programs that can be super challenging for people. And, to Frank's point, actually contributes to, leading folks into poverty or continuing their stay in poverty. So I think that makes sense.
Can I say something? I'm Mary Griffin from Legal Aid, but Section 8 doesn't have a resource limit effectively. I mean, it's like if you have over enough money to be earning interest on it, like over $100,000 or something.
200,000
to 200,000. Yeah. So there's no resource limit for Section 8.
It's not just if it doesn't earn any interest, there is a calculation.
Right.
It's quite small, but there is.
But we're talking
yeah.
really these are people who are going to be staying in a hotel. There's
Yeah.
effectively no resource limit for our purposes for Section 8. We're comparing it to that.
And in some ways, there's a real benefit to matching to Section 8, because a lot of these individuals and households will end up in a Section 8 or housing voucher of some kind. So if we're matching it more to that, then that's what they're getting used to when they're in this program. And so that will be easier to continue. I have found that the changes in what I'm allowed to do in benefits, as in poverty, depending on which program, is the most challenging part of being in poverty.
Yeah, I think what's hard to balance is, as Nicole brought up earlier, if you're trying to then make a decision on the phone and have people have information that they can be sharing to get into something that night. I mean, I think that, just thinking about the amount of time we want people spending to get into this program versus the amount of time we might recognize that they would have to spend to get into, get a federal voucher. Like, I don't think we want that to be the same. So I think that's just something to be thinking about, is practically then, what would that look like? How long would that take? Because I think already there's, we don't want people waiting on the phones for as long as they've been waiting on the phones. We want it, so I think just thinking about how this then is operationalized is really important.
I agree. I would think the resource test would have the lower administrative burden, the income contribution might increase. And so there's functional things to work out.
Is there anyone just sort of doing that, straw poll test? Is there anyone that disagrees with with removing the resource test from the program eligibility?
I really don't feel comfortable with, again, I think as Miranda said, it's really hard to look at things in isolation for me right now. So I think
I was going to echo what Lily just said, that as we continue to, if we were to move the resource test, it might make 50 more people eligible. And as we do that, the program potential eligibility is significantly larger than the number of rooms that we have. So I do think we have to look at it in totality.
Nicole, do you have data on how many people you turn away based on the resource tests, that resource piece?
I have limited data. We started collecting data on denial reasons just like 6 months ago. So I have some limited data, but I also know that many households don't apply because they are familiar with our rules. So I could pull data for what I have, but it's a small time period.
I also think it functionally comes down to people's, and I'm just going to say this, like people's, how educated and how resourceful people are and how these systems work. And so there is a real equity issue in terms of that type of thing as well. We find that people with significant mental health disabilities might just say a lot of things, some of which aren't even accurate. For example, like hopeful things about their income or hopeful things about their resources. And then we have to go back and say, like, hey, that resource doesn't actually exist. And that can actually prevent, if we're talking about how long it takes for somebody to get into the program, that can actually create quite a lot of problems.
Frank, go ahead. You're muted, Frank.
Sorry, just for purposes of tracking this for the spreadsheet, if it works for everyone, how does it sound if I'm flagging things where it seems like we have at least majority support, knowing that we are likely going to end up with majority and minority reports, understanding that some folks won't be able to weigh in until they've seen the totality, but it sounds like there was just some potential concern, or not even concern. The administration representatives are not in a position to say yes or no right now, but it seems like the rest of the group was aligned. And so take that as likely majority and just flag it for purposes of our tracking that way.
That's right.
Yeah. No,
I would oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing.
I would love to hear from members that we haven't heard from. So Christopher, Elizabeth, Elise, I know this is your first meeting, but I think it's important for us to hear from all of our task force members.
I could go first, Sarah. There's just one little bit of wording in what Frank said that I don't want to say that all members are aligned until we have a better picture, because I don't think I can't say that I'm 100% aligned in something if I can't see the totality of it. So I just want to be cautious about saying broad strokes right now until there's a better picture. Some pieces of the meeting sometimes feel very disjointed. It's difficult to see the big picture. I love the straw poll idea, but I want us to be cautious of broad strokes in our language.
Really good feedback, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Yeah, I
Chris-
wanted to just, oh, sorry, Sarah.
No, I can't see. Is someone in the room is talking?
Yeah, it was Elise with VHCB.
Okay, go ahead, Elise.
Sort of wanted to echo that sentiment. I don't have the decision-making authority to like make policy decisions on behalf of VHCB. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, that in terms of broad strokes agreements, we're really, I feel like I'm very much here in a listening capacity. We don't, interact so much with this. We're more on the permanent affordability and funding of emergency housing shelter side. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thanks for saying that. Christopher, go ahead.
Sure. As articulated by the state partners, the league really can't look at the eligibility in a whole without looking at the entire package. But more so important for the league is once that eligibility is established as an entire package, to bounce that off and look at it through the prism of proportionality for the hotel and shelter spaces throughout the state. And I know that is looked to be at our number 4 charge through the statute, but especially both equal and equitable proportionality of services. So if a community in the state, a district or county in the state is experiencing or houses 25%, by example, of individuals, then there needs to be some discussion if that district has less than 25% of the resources, the service providers, the state employees to serve that population. So while the league is certainly looking at proportionality geographically for shelter, we're also discussing the need for likewise proportionality for resources. And again, looking at those two things can't be done without looking at the whole package and figuring out what the numbers are.
Okay. I mean, I think what I'm hearing, I guess, is it naive of me to think that task force members would all make recommendations? I mean, it kind of sounds like folks are sort of sitting back to see what other people make of recommendations and then deciding whether or not their organization can agree to them. Is that, maybe I just need to kind of reframe that, but can someone help me to understand, like, I guess that is a, process or procedure, kind of a question, but how do we engage all of the members here in this room to weigh in on the development of those recommendations and not just respond to what, folks have presented? I guess I would just put that question out to the group.
Brenda has her hand raised.
I mean, I was thinking that we were just doing basically a straw poll, and so I'll get back to that, but just in general, I wasn't thinking that we were making a final decision. And so if the administration or if the HCB needs to say, like, I can't be part of that straw poll right now because I don't have the authority to, I think that's okay, but it still makes sense for us to have, like, generally, I need to see even if it's generally, I need to see the whole, but I generally agree with that. That's okay, I think, that seems to me like that's a way for us to get a sense of where we are. Otherwise, it's challenging to move forward. And then in terms of getting people to engage, I think some of that is there are going to be people who bring in proposals, and then there are going to be people who respond to proposals. I don't know that we can just like with the people in the program, we can't force engagement. It has to be you know, directed by the people at this table, so self-directed. And so I think that we can't make that necessarily happen. I mean, those are my two thoughts on what
I
you're.
also think it depends on like what part of the system you're working within.
Right.
Like I could have all kinds of recommendations because that's the nature of my personality, and I've worked in this system for a long time, but I'm representing VCP. So it's really about like from the service provider lens. And so I understand that not everybody's going to have recommendations for everything because of the part of the system that they work within. So I think that's pretty natural.
It'd be nice to have the straw poll so we had a sense of where people were. So, because I feel like we could land in all of our disagreement happening at the last minute if we don't get a sense.
That's my worry too. That's why I was saying if there's a way for us to, you know, kind of, but I mean, I understand everything that folks are saying too. And my intent is never to force participation. So I, you know, definitely hope that wasn't perceived that way.
No.
Or I just don't want, I'm just concerned about getting to the, as you said, like sort of getting to the end and having people be like, no, actually, I don't agree with any of this. And, you know, like that would be a hard place for us to land as a group, I think. So,
I think, Sarah, this is Lily. I think it would be helpful for me, and you know me, in terms of like my preference for like tasks and structure. I think what could be helpful for me is, you know, we have, I think, 3 meetings left. I think kind of getting a sense of like, back to that charge, like what are the things that we want to focus on, which I think we're doing today. So I don't want to totally derail from this conversation, but like kind of as a group, maybe at the next meeting, if you and Jubilee could almost propose a set of like, hey, I can't remember exactly how many there were, but like of the 14 charges, we think we let's see if we can make prioritizations on these 8. Let's just say maybe we can't make prioritizations on these 6. We're going to have a full written set of the recommendations in advance of X meeting, because I think part of it, what I'm hearing from some people too, is like, you know, some people are very verbal, other people need things written down. It can be hard if we're like, wait, what did we just agree on? Now we're going something, you know, so again, if by some date we could have, and I really appreciate, Frank, what you're doing, have that list, be able to come back, because again, a lot of us are representing bigger entities, so be able to like get that feedback and then do some more of that like bigger picture. And then again, I think that could be a place for public comment. But I think this is a good conversation. And I think for right now, I think the process to just make sure that there's at least some level of momentum, I think is good, but then be able to kind of pinpoint for people when in the future they should be more prepared to kind of like, yes, no vote.
It's funny, right before you said that, Lily, I was texting Sarah.
I don't have my phone today. It's in my car. I gotta go grab it. I'll see all of them later.
Yeah, great. But yeah, so like Sarah and I can sit down and write a whole package of recommendations, but this is helpful and for us, like we kind of started to do in our presentation is we can do what we think, but the reason we're doing this and getting people's is we want to know, like, she and I are both very busy. And so, so we don't want to have this whole thing where nobody's going to agree to it. So what we're doing now, even if you can't say for sure, just being like, okay, you know, hot, cold, where people are at gives us a little bit of guidance on what we can put down and try and waste as little time in these final meetings with something on paper. So I hope folks are willing to bear with us and we'll just acknowledge that anything you say on here is not a final decision. just, we're trying to temp check and see where you all are at on things. So we can at least have something that is kind of in a zone of where people could get, and then we can fine tune once we have it on paper or computer screen.
I agree with the eligibility, especially the, that income contributions should go towards, housing needs, because it's amazing the amount of, people that move into an apartment, they finally have an apartment and they have no bed, no furniture, nothing to cook with, and that there should be no resource test, I think.
Thanks, Shelby.
The question, thank you.
She wasn't here when we were talking about it, so
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
Yeah. Glad you weighed in.
Okay, do we have other recommendations or thoughts around program eligibility? Or is it okay for us to move into kind of length of eligibility or participation? Obviously,
we
these
want-
things are tied.
we-
Oh,
This is Jubilee. We had kind of two other things that were in just the bills. Under
okay,
eligibility,
sorry.
the evictions, and then experiencing domestic violence. I hope everyone is on board with. But do we just want to touch on those before we then go into the max, like the length of stay and all of that?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up.
Do you want me to read them? I have it right in front of me.
Please.
Okay, so number 8 is under a court-ordered eviction or constructive eviction due to circumstances over which the household has no control. And so, yeah, that's number 8. There are thoughts and recommendations around that.
Support continuing that language.
What?
I said I support continuing that language. I think there's resulting rules that we can work on, but that's for the legislature.
Is there anyone who disagrees or, for that gut check, I guess? We can't say we agree or disagree, but anyone else have thoughts on that eligibility criteria related to evictions? Okay. All right. The domestic violence piece, is there any discussion around that eligibility criteria?
Do you want me to read it? Just
Sure.
So number 9 is experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, hate violence, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or a household member. Brenda has.
After somebody else has things to say. So we recently discovered that there was, that doesn't necessarily count, and I think it needs to be addressed because this is a recommendation, I guess, of ours. If somebody experiences domestic violence inside one of the hotels, so it didn't cause them, because of the way it's worded, it didn't cause them to lose their original housing, and therefore, there's people who are experiencing domestic violence and are not able to access necessary. There's created some complicated challenges around them getting support that they need, not necessarily with the domestic violence agency, but they then have to separate from, and their domestic violence isn't counting as an eligibility requirement because of rules. So it's not necessarily something that you can, but except that I guess my recommendation is that the language be very clear that,
Including.
including violence that happens when you are housed in the shelter or hotel.
Okay,
Nicole, are you-
I'm a little confused about why that wouldn't count. Nicole, can we look to you to provide that?
Right now, the rule says that language that has caused loss of housing. I'm not familiar with the particular case. I'd have to look at it individually. I would have thought that it would have been covered, but I would have to look at the case specifically.
But wouldn't they already be eligible though?
That's what
Not
I'm thinking.
necessarily.
I mean, if
Not-
their partner was eligible and they weren't under category, but I would still think that they would be eligible under domestic violence, even if it happened at the hotel. But I would need to, that's my gut reaction to that situation.
So I just want to make sure I understand the scenario. So like, you know, person A is eligible. They're letting person B crash at the hotel.
No, because if you're in a household where one of you is eligible and the other one is not, so it might be that the eligible person was the person who was the violent partner or was and so the person that wouldn't have been eligible on their own. And now it's
Got it.
so and
So
Michelle's the
you're-
one that deals with the host, not deals with the Michelle's the one that's taken those calls, so I don't.
So you're, okay, so that's helpful. So you have person A has an eligible
Person A is 70. They're eligible under
Yeah,
age.
person A is
Person
70.
B is 30.
Yeah.
they're together as a household, then person A assaults person B, what happens to person B? Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to add in that case, the woman that was assaulted was able to get the abuser out of her room, but she then had to also start all over with housing applications and like funding applications. Anything she had done had also had his name on it, and she had to start all over, but her eligibility didn't count or start over. So it was like, I think, not even a week later that she was exited.
To be clear,
Well,
under the current version
yeah.
of the rules that has 80 days, it's 80 days for that individual, not 80 days for that individual for that instance of homelessness, like for whatever the
Right.
eligibility criteria was. So that would be something that we should talk about at another point, but that's the current
Yeah,
rule.
not
So yeah.
necessarily saying that like her 80 days should have started over, but it was just I think it was a really difficult situation for her, and there didn't seem to be anything we could do.
And so the other dynamic potentially is that there is a separate process. Some domestic violence agencies manage motel pools. And so there is a separate process if there is an active motel pool where GA would be referring to the DV agency first. And the household has to work with them and potentially take shelter. So
Yeah, that didn't.
She is now working as a DV agency.
I don't.
I see Elizabeth's hand up. Actually, go ahead,
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sarah. I just have a question that I'm hoping could maybe offer some clarity, at least for me, in thinking about some of these situations. And I guess this is for Nicole. So prior, when there was a limit on the number of nights, that was policy. And I'm curious if now that this is gone to the legislators, a legislative decision, how does this affect ESD's ability to make exceptions to rules around things like night stay? So, you know, if somebody had an extenuating circumstance in the past, I guess it's my assumption that ESD had the ability to make some determinations based on those unique situations. Is that still the case now with this room cap, or is that no longer something that ESD can do if there are extenuating circumstances to extend their night cap?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Pre-COVID, the night counts were 28 or 84 based on how you were eligible. And ESD did have the ability to approve an extension of that. We often did that for very short periods of time, a couple of days, to bridge someone into permanent housing. It's my understanding that because the 80 days is in statute, not in rule, that ESD no longer has the ability to waive or override the 80 days.
Thank you, Nicole.
I'm not wanting to get, because we haven't talked about day limits yet. I was more just talking about the domestic violence, just making sure that our recommendation is simply that we ensure that somebody who, because they ended up not prioritized in this situation. So just for clarity, and it went to management, and management said no, and that's kind of where it stopped. And so perhaps that's something that needs to be just messaged back, but in terms of legislate, like what we're making recommendation for the legislature. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to clarify that point, right now the rule says causing your own loss of housing. So I think to Brenda's point, clarifying what housing is, it would include shelter. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, I agree, obviously, with this eligibility kind of category, and do think making it just clearer so there aren't any, we do know that sometimes, people get different training around the state. And so it just makes it super clear.
I appreciate you highlighting that.
Highlighting that clarity.
Oh, did somebody just say something? I'm sorry, I think I missed that.
Oh, it was just me, Julie. I was just saying, is anybody opposed to adding that clarity in this moment? No final decision. Okay, so that is the end of the eligibility kind of sections as it appears in the budget in H79, H879.
Okay. Shall we move into length of eligibility? Do folks need like a 5-minute break? I need like a 2-minute break.
Yeah.
You guys can go ahead. I just need to take a quick break for a second, if that's okay.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we take a 10-minute break? We're about halfway through.
Okay.
And I will mute the room for everyone.
Hi, everyone. Are we ready to jump back in, or we need a few more minutes?
Say that again.
We have, I think, a couple, or just shall we?
Did you say we're just waiting on Shelby?
Yes, in the room.
Okay.
Send her a text. She might have had to go from. Yeah.
Should we go ahead and get started or give it another minute?
Let's give it another minute. They were, people had to go upstairs.
Okay, sounds good.
Always a problem. Good to not be the one, you know?
It's not like my favorite, but I was
like,
I'll eat it.
yeah.
It's there, I'll eat it.
Okay, I think we can get started now, Sarah.
Okay, great. So, well, looking back to our agenda, we wanted to, I'm just gonna, where is that? Oh, I have way too many tabs up. We are devoting the bulk of our meeting, as we talked about, to program eligibility, length of eligibility, and then some conversation around notification and communication. I think that it would be great for us to spend the last 15 minutes or so of our time today sort of recapping what we talked about and talking about some next steps so we can be prepared going into our next meeting. So looking at the time, we have about an hour or so, a little over an hour to continue this conversation. Let's try to break down the next to length of eligibility and notification and communication into, let's do maybe 35 minutes for length of eligibility and about 30 minutes for notification. And I will try to do my best to keep us on track here. So opening up conversation around the length of eligibility, some of the things that have been discussed, I'm just going to look back at my notes, and you can definitely feel free to let me know if this does not feel consistent. We have had some discussion around determining the maximum number of days of eligibility. There has been some discussion that length of stay should be based on data provided by the coordinated entry system. There's been some discussion for the opposite, for unlimited stay. And there has been some discussion to determine the requirements for a household to maintain participation within the program. So those are the kind of notes that I had from summing up the conversations that we've had to date. Does anyone have recommendations that they would like to make today? Shelby, is that your hand that's up? And I see Frank's hand. Okay, Shelby, go ahead, and then Frank.
So I have a proposal for day limits. So those who meet eligibility requirements qualify for up to 6 months. After 6 months, there is a standardized review process if the person remains in need of GA emergency housing with an appointed committee alongside their care team. The purpose of the review process is not to exit people from the program, but rather to review what has been done and identify what changes need to be made or what additional supports could be helpful in order to address barriers that have prevented the household from being housed. Understanding that on some occasions, the only barrier will be lack of appropriate housing stock, in which case households will continue with their current plan. This would prevent unsheltered homelessness and increase support to permanent housing while reducing reliance on GA emergency housing.
Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you.
Frank.
I had a couple other thoughts, but I'm not sure if it would make sense to kind of talk about what Shelby just lifted up before kind of.
I think it would be great to hear sort of all thoughts and then to kind of see if there is agreement across what's presented. That sounds okay to everybody?
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents, and would love to talk more about what Shelby just lifted up as well, is that the BAA language last year, I think is, I guess from my perspective, the ideal, in that what that did was it recognized that not everyone is going to be sheltered under the GA program. So obviously it only impacts the people who are eligible under the program. So we already have a reduced universe of people who are eligible, but understanding that that group who's eligible are the folks who have been designated by the legislature, and our recommendations, I think, would mirror that, who are highly vulnerable and in need. So kind of a limited number of vulnerable people only. And from my perspective, if you qualify under those conditions, like the BAA language said last year, you should be sheltered under the GA program. And so there's no length of stay. It's just if you are vulnerable, then you are sheltered. I think that would be the ideal, but we also talked about trying to, if we were not going to have consensus on that, we talked about making sure, as you mentioned, Sarah, that it was that the kind of length of stay was specifically tied to actual data and not just kind of making up numbers like 24, 84, 80 days. And so for that, we've actually talked within the COCs to understand, like, is there a way for us to look at like the current data sets to understand like what a realistic time frame would be for people to be expected to be able to find housing. And that is something we're still working through. We had kind of come up with a couple of ways to think about it, and there was some concern that folks within the COCs lifted up around a couple of those approaches. And so we're reaching out to a few other data partners right now, but we should be in a place to have recommendations that I could email or send to the group or bring to the next meeting that would be based on the kind of data sources that we have, understanding, you know, the reality of the ground and not just kind of making things up.
Thanks, Frank. Other thoughts?
I do think one of the things that I'm hearing from what Shelby, you shared, that I do think is sort of a challenge is that, you know, GA really is a benefits program, and yet there really is this huge component around then like programming, and how do you help support people who are in the program, and how do you then kind of try to connect that with things like length of stay. And yeah, I think that's like has been a kind of an ongoing challenge, you know, especially with this many people in the program, is like what does that look like? What's a way to do it? You know, how do we have capacity for it? You know, again, I think this is where it ties in with some of these numbers, is like, do we even have the case managers in the community who could work with this potentially like 1,500 plus population? And then how do you ensure that it's not sort of then an abrupt review process, you know? And I think this is something that ESG has looked at differently over times, where sometimes there were, at different points in time, there were sort of requirements between points of reauthorization, you know, which in some ways is similar to kind of what you're talking about, of you know, but how do you make those clear? What are they? Who? And I think that's been something we've really struggled with over the past 2 years is things look really different to each person. ESD, again, needs to be able to make quick decisions so that people aren't having huge lapses in service. How are you able to then distill, yes, Lily still needs it, is still doing what she needs, versus Amy, maybe she still needs it, but she's not doing what she needs. You know, like that's a really hard thing. So I appreciate that thought, and I'm thinking.
I just have something
I
really,
think Sarah's got her hand up, and then Brenda, then Amy.
Amy, can you before me?
Okay.
Thanks, Jubilee. I want to speak to a couple of things that I heard. First, I like the spirit of the kind of collaborative and supportive nature within Shelby's proposal. Second, I think Frank's point around, you know, defining that eligibility criteria means that these folks in this program are, you know, are really vulnerable and in most cases, you know, require consistent shelter stay until they're able to move into housing. The last thing I wanted to mention is that I know it's something that we've kind of talked around, but I think to me, and some of the feedback that I received recently at the VCAP meeting last week, I think some of you heard, Frank and Lily, you were both there, is the idea of kind of a philosophical shift from general assistance being a benefit program to this actually being a shelter program, and what might be required. So I'm around, you know, what might be, I don't want to say like required, but like how that reframe might change kind of how we think and talk about shelter within the motels. So I think I would look to our shelter providers and the provisions that are, you know, required for those shelter providers. And I would love to see how those provisions, you know, in terms of engagement or behavioral, you know, requirements or, you know, coordinated entry or, you know, forward sort of progress on, you know, working toward housing goals. How can we make this shelter in motels similar and consistent with the way shelter is provided in the community, and what needs to happen for that to take place? Additionally, I wanted to speak to something that Lily, you mentioned around case management capacity, and I think you're absolutely right. We don't have case management capacity for you know, a lot of people who are, you know, who are homeless, whether or not they're in, you know, a motel shelter or a community shelter setting or outside. And I think that really speaks to, you know, the need to kind of expand that service capacity, which is something that Chris brought up earlier in the meeting. But how can we expand our capacity, like our workforce around housing case management, to include, you know, the entirety of you know, AHS department staff and contracted partners. So those are some of the things as I'm taking this and that I'm kind of thinking about.
I just wanted to piggyback on the case management piece around whether people are in GA housing or not. Like, they're either in the housing or in the wind, and it's a lot harder to work with them in the wind. From a service provider perspective, we are still working with those people, and it becomes much more challenging when they become unhoused and on the street and we can't find them. And I talked about this in the last meeting, then they lose ground and it becomes much harder. We start back from square one. And so in this 6-month process with the review, we're able to see what's working, what's not, what are the barriers. But I think the other piece that we have to be really honest about is there is a housing crisis in this state. We have known it for a long time. It has not been addressed in the way that it needed to. And so it isn't about like, we can't just rely on this GA program. This is what we have. We actually need to robustly or aggressively invest in it and ramp it up right now until we have something that we can build a runway to, because there isn't something more permanent that's been created in the state that's going to help to address the crisis. So how are we not trying to say it costs this much money to do it and we got to keep it within that box? No, we don't, because we can't, because the need is much bigger, and this really is going to get people in a better place than if we put limits or say, like, we got to ramp it down. To what I see happen a lot in the course of my career is ramping things down or getting rid of things before the next thing has even been thought about or created / implemented, and that's hugely problematic. So I think it's really important for us to kind of like maybe shift the lens around, like, it's not about trying to like make this smaller or make it affordable. It's going to cost more, and but how are we recognizing the importance of it, and that is the need right now before we transition to something else. And again, I just want to reiterate, we are still, as service providers, working with these families, these vulnerable populations, regardless of if they're housed or not.
I think what I was trying to say specifically about service providers is, like, I don't think we have enough service providers now. And so then I think to all of this around like case management or length of stay, that like requires more people to manage, which then I think you brought to in some ways is like, well, maybe you don't even need that if you just say there is no length of stay requirement. But I think I was specifically speaking to, like, we don't have enough capacity even now.
Right, in the
to be serving
proposal, we talk about like the and I don't know if we use this language. This is my language. The underinvestment in the service provider sector. I mean, we talk about this every year when we come to the legislature, that in addition to aggressive investment in this program, there needs to be aggressive investment in the service provider sector, because we can't recruit and retain. So you will hear that in this proposal as well, that one of the recommendations is infused funding into the service provider sector so that we can get more people to be able to provide supports to folks who are in the shelter program.
I'm confused. What's the proposal?
This that we've been reading from.
No,
Our suggestions.
They have a printout of
Yeah.
some of their.
the ones that we came up with together, the three of us. So,
Do you
okay.
have that as part of, is the
Um,
public record to share, or you?
We will be able to share it public record. We just wanted to like present them and be able to.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I was just confused.
Okay. Sorry.
We're after Amy.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, this is, again, this idea around reviewing every 6 months. I want to be really clear. It's not about deciding if people are still eligible or if they're not eligible. It's about figuring out what is needed to assist them if they haven't yet found housing or found their next step in that 6 month period. So the idea is not to unshelter people based on whether or not they've met a requirement, but rather to figure out what is missing. So really keeping a client-centered approach. That's where that came from. And I think part of the reason that at least that came up for myself, for Shelby, this has been really important to make sure that we're not exiting people before they find permanent housing. But also in our work, we have found that we have sometimes begged, and partially we have a service provider, to Chris's point, proposal in here that I'll read in 1 second because it seems like it's part of this discussion. But is that sometimes we're asking to have that team approach or that review process so that we can try to, because we're working, our primary clients are complex needs clients, and we're trying to figure out how, not with the state, but with community providers, and they either don't have capacity or it's just not happening. And now as people are being exited, we're getting a lot of referrals and calls of people saying like, please, can you help us triage and figure out how to support? And that's really hard when what we're figuring out with that person is whether or not where they can plug in their oxygen. And so I think that so we're saying like, let's have a built-in review process so that we know that when we're working with clients, we review. So that's not about them being required and they get kicked out if they didn't meet like these. It's not about a
punitive process, rather it's about a supportive process and kind of flipping that script a little. And I guess I'll just read this proposal, if that makes sense, because we're talking about the provider support as like part of this thing. So what we came up with was, with a lot of help from Amy, is service providers need significant additional funding to carry out increased engagement with households and provide robust wraparound services. There needs to be increased investment in the service sector so that providers can recruit and retain support staff, to Lily's point. Additionally, each household's care team should be able to identify that they are meeting regularly to address hurdles and barriers to housing and service support. Regularly, this care team should identify when it is necessary to bring additional providers or state agencies on board to troubleshoot barriers to access. A housing first model should be implemented to ensure that services are robustly available but not required to create a client-centered and client-directed model of care. When necessary, non-traditional case management can be implemented to address barriers. And at any point of emergency or significant loss of emergency shelter, area agencies or local providers should have an emergency plan in place with the purpose of troubleshooting high-risk households. To be clear, that's not a requirement that those local providers keep them sheltered, but that we know what we're going to do if that happens, because the chaos of that sudden loss of shelter, and some communities already have that. We work within communities who are absolutely meeting every 2 days and have a plan in place, and we work within communities where that is not happening. And so I think that we have seen the difference in the success of having a plan in place, and so that is why that is there. That recommendation. So that's it. I'm adding that to the 80-day recommendation, not to distract us from it, but it seems like our 80-day our length of stay recommendation our length of stay recommendation is tied to, I think, some more service sector support for sure.
Can I add something to that? So VHCB, since July of 2023, has been tracking the amount of units in our permanent rental portfolio, which is nonprofit developers across the state, and the turnover of units that have gone towards folks who are experiencing homelessness. And so right now, since July of 2023, that number is at 37%, and that's just turnovers of units. And so, I think in line with this proposal, just to say that I think we're seeing a need in permanent housing as well for service supports, especially for these higher acuity populations that are exiting homelessness and now need support to be housed long-term and securely.
Can I ask a question? Does VHCB track how long people are able to stay housed? Like
So we
37% of the units are going, but then people come in and they bomb out because they're not getting enough support.
So we don't track those numbers specifically. We have some turnover data, but it's not linked to the homeless population or the folks who are experiencing homelessness.
I think that we can definitely talk about the service provision capacity, recommendations that we have. I think that obviously additional funding is important for creating a healthy and strong and adequate workforce for people. I also think that we can look at investments across across the AHS departments, like and contractors, so like the AAAs and like the parent-child centers and the Department of Mental Health, or the, you know, DMH and, you know, medical stuff. Like, I wonder how we can look to not repurpose, but incorporate some kind of like housing related support into that workforce that already exists to, you know, in order to expand capacity in a way that makes sense, utilizing existing structures. So that's kind of some of the things, that's sort of one of the thoughts that I have talking through this. Frank, I noticed that your hand was up. So do you still have, but then you put it down. Do you still have something that you would like to say?
No, I can hold it for later, for sure.
You're on mute, Sarah.
I know, I just realized that. I wonder if it makes sense for us to pause on that, recognize that service capacity is a challenge and a need. Put a pin in that, and I know that it's obviously related to length of eligibility, but I'm wondering if we can maybe like keep focused on the length of eligibility for the purpose of this conversation, and then I have made some really detailed notes around the service capacity piece.
I think that's great.
I think that's a good idea. And can I just add that, I guess I haven't said this in this discussion about the length of stay, but our clients and VCILs, peer support, the people that they peer support, are particularly challenging to house. And so when we have a limited length of stay, it's the people with the most complex needs who end up being most harmed by that. And so that is part of why I think this is so critical, and also aging population, like people that have the most complex care needs. Not that other people are not, but I don't think it's easy to identify which people those are. I don't think that's something that can be legislated exactly, but I do think that keeping in mind that usually people that have more capacity are able to get through the process in a faster than people who have less capacity to be able to get through it. And so what we're really talking about when we don't have a length of stay, or when we have a review process that is part of the length of stay, or any of those things, is meeting the needs of those who will naturally rise to the top as the most vulnerable. Not without having to actually legislate who deserves to stay inside and who doesn't in that way.
I think, Brenda, just to respond to that, I think that is where coordinated entry comes in, because coordinated entry ensures that people have access to housing resources in a way that takes into account their level of vulnerability and the length of time that they have been homeless. So I think that's where I feel like coordinated entry is a critical piece to this, because that is how we as a state, you know, track this data on, you know, both a regional level and a statewide level. So I really want to lift up that, you know, the idea is that behind coordinated entry is that it does provide that equity and ensures that we are directing housing resources toward people who are most vulnerable. Lily, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit from your perspective about how shelters how shelters operate in terms of, like, from your perspective. I'm totally putting you on the spot right now. You know, are there length of stay that are, what needs to happen in order to try to create some consistency between a motel shelter and a community-based shelter?
Sure. So first of all, the Office of Economic Opportunity and Department for Children and Families doesn't fund all shelters in the state. So I can really only speak to those that are funded through the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. Also, that includes a range of shelters. So you have shelters providing services to those experiencing domestic violence. You have those serving families. You have those serving individuals. A few have kind of like mixed populations. So again, we're a grant program. They have to operate within our standards and policies, but there is discretion in terms of their programming and decision-making. Not all shelters have length of stay policies. Some don't have a length of stay requirement. And then some do. And that's where, you know, we then try to have guidance to make sure that, I think what Shelby mentioned earlier around like the external factors such as like the limited housing stock wouldn't then impact somebody's length of stay, but that instead they relate to kind of like more significant either health or safety concerns or you know, other dynamics that are really, you know, the person just maybe is not doing well in that environment, and they're really having these discussions about like what would make sense for them or not. And again, hopefully it's an ongoing process and it's not, you know, we wouldn't look for just something, oh, at some random time they're making a decision, they have to, there's an appeal process. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Sarah.
It does. How do you see that same kind of logic applied to or working with a motel shelter?
I mean, I think, right, again, so some shelters don't have a length of stay, and I think some people have expressed that they would not like a length of stay. I think if you're gonna have a length of stay, I think one of the things that we look at is really, again, what is the communication around the expectations for the person being in shelter? What is the really assertive engagement that the shelter staff are taking to engage and help support that person in their plan and being safe in the shelter environment? So, you know, that's just like something that potentially you would have to think through again if someone's in a motel, because they don't have someone that is on site necessarily daily the way that you would in a shelter. And again, some shelters don't have those. Shelby, did you have a?
Yeah, so first I wanted to add that with coordinated entry, all of our clients, actually, I think there's only 3 of our clients that are not in coordinated entry. So the majority of our clients are in coordinated entry, and so we did take that into account when talking about the day limits. And I also, on a more personal note with the day limits and the review suggestion, I know when I was in the motel, I wasn't there for an entire month before I had a premature newborn baby. And living in the motel with a newborn baby, I couldn't use every hour of every day looking for housing and calling providers. And I'm really lucky that I wasn't in the program when the 80-day limit was a thing. But even if there was a day limit, a review process really would have been amazing for us, because at one point we had, like, for the first 3 months, her visiting nurse came every other day and was there for 4 to 5 hours. Then 2 months later, she was only coming once a week. So we had a lot more time to focus on housing, go look at housing, like do the applications, connect with providers. The providers I was connected with luckily understood what I was going through. But had they not been so attentive, like I know they are not in some areas, a review, I think, would have been helpful in more than one way. Just keeping on track with obviously what we were required to do as a household and should be doing, but also what support we needed. Because that changes month to month, or sometimes that changes day to day.
I think that the review is critical, and I want to highlight, I'm not sure what is happening in other regions, but in Chittenden County, there is actually a weekly review, a case consultation review among service providers where they can, kind of talk through challenges, around a case or barriers, or gather resources from other providers. I think that I'm pretty sure each region has like an adult lit team, the local interagency team. I'm not sure, Lily, if you know for sure, but I think that there are some that what you're talking about really is sort of that case consultation piece, which is definitely a best practice for for utilizing resources in case, across the system for case management.
And in each region that happens differently in our experience with our organizations. So like there are agencies, I actually went over this yesterday just to clarify it, because there was some like disconnect in understanding. So in some regions, they regularly are meeting as a group and doing it. You can present to the lit team, and in some regions it's on demand. And so you don't have that regularly, but even so, just people have different care teams. And so having that's what I mean. It's happening different in each district, but also having that very focused on each client review every 6 months, I think would be just, to Shelby's point, would make it, especially if it was centered around them, not as like a punitive thing, but as a supportive thing. I think that would really be helpful. I've never met anyone. I mean, there are people who are the services we can talk about later.
So I want to just make sure I understand the proposal or recommendations that you are, that you're sharing with us. I mean, it sounds like we've talked about expanding eligibility to encompass, potentially, to have that be more expansive. We've talked about there not being a day limit. Does your recommendation include a room limit?
We have a different, no, we don't, we separated the room cap from the discussion about day limit. And we aren't recommending, I don't think the three of us are not recommending a room cap, and that's assuming a different part of the conversation. Am I wrong? And what I do want to say is that I don't think our recommendation is in conflict with Frank's recommendation necessarily. I think they work well together. So I think that they complement one another. That's what I'm going for. And the room cap, I'll put it out there if it's the moment for it. Is it? Yes. Which is that we don't believe there should be a room cap. It doesn't make sense and creates complicated barriers that could have catastrophic outcomes to accessing emergency shelter. Instead, we propose increased funding and support to create additional non-congregate shelter, transitional housing, and permanent housing, which we hope we'll talk about at some point here, which will reduce the reliance on GA emergency shelter over time, providing a humane and just transition from GA emergency shelter to a more traditional emergency shelter.
Nicole?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand the proposal. So in addition to that, since this process looks at expanding who's currently eligible and extending people's length of time in hotels, are you thinking that, how are you proposing in this that we deal with the hundreds of households that could be eligible but not have access to a room? Is there some kind of prioritization in there? Or I just want to make sure I'm clear on what's being suggested.
I do think that there's part of this that would be legislative, to be clear, and I don't want to overstep where I think we should be making recommendations. But I think that what we're saying is that we can discuss what natural capacity happens at 90% of natural capacity. It does need to, in our proposal, include people with disabilities at any age, especially we can talk about what those disabilities are, but we wouldn't support any prioritization in natural capacity, meaning what the capacity is without a room cap. That doesn't include people who would, I think, in any setting be considered extraordinarily vulnerable at that 90% rate. So we can have that conversation in more proposal, but.
Elise has her hand raised.
I hate to be this person, but can you give me like a quick definition of what you mean by room cap?
So right now there's a room cap of 1,100 rooms from September 15th to November 30th. Currently, it says April 1st to June 30th. I personally hope that changes before April 1st. But that is what's happening right now.
So it's the rooms available at any given time.
Well, it's the legislature has defined that there can only be 1,100 rooms used. And so our proposal does not include a room cap.
Okay, thank you.
But I do want to make sure that those, like the day limit and the room cap, I don't know that the conversation is completely, that's like to me, like intertwining them entirely is legislative. And to make sure that we're talking about like, what do people need? What should this program look like? I think moving away from benefit to program and what is possible are kind of two conversations that have to be weaved together, but shouldn't be enmeshed in a way that distracts from what people need to end up housed and not have what's happening right now, today, and every day for the last 3 weeks happen ever again.
Frank, go ahead.
I think kind of agreeing with Brenda in that I think we're like talking about two separate things here. One is what the requirement should be based on the kind of expertise of this body to bring recommendations to the legislature. We have another charge later down the list around the number and types of emergency shelter spaces. And so that's maybe where we have the conversations about how many rooms we'll need. If we're agreeing on this is who qualifies, then how many rooms do we need is that conversation. And I guess my 2 cents would be like, I hope that we kind of go into this not from a scarcity mindset, but more the mindset, and we've talked about this before, but like, on certain issues at the legislature, the fiscal impact is never brought up. How are we going to pay for this is never brought up. I can think of nothing more important than providing people, particularly the vulnerable people who we're talking about here, with shelter access. And so like if the legislature can get away with passing highly regressive criminal laws that require the construction of entirely new prisons that costs, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year just to construct, and then, tens of thousands of dollars a year per person to cage someone. I hope that we can kind of try and force the legislature to recognize that what we're talking about here are humans who are extremely vulnerable, who need access to emergency shelter and services. And therefore, we should prioritize that and not go into it, with this kind of how are we going to pay for it mindset, or how are we going to find the rooms mindset, but really put it on the legislature to solve this is what we recommend it should be. And the legislature needs to figure it out just like they do to cage people.
I think that's important context, Frank. I think that I guess I would really advocate that we consider how community-based shelters are operated and see how we can apply that same logic and guidelines and best practice to a motel-based shelter. And then what would be needed in order to make that successful. I think that, you know, funding does come into this, you know, so I guess like I don't want to pretend like that doesn't exist. I hear, you know, strongly what you're, you know, everything that you're saying. You know, I mean, I guess I worry that if we're, you know, and I've shared this, I know, Frank, with you, I worry that if we're very, you know, kind of pie in the sky, that is not going to, I wonder how much weight our, you know, recommendations we have might hold. So I guess I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just curious about, you know, what that means.
Yeah, I guess my sense on that is that I don't think we're being pie in the sky because we're creating eligibility. And so we're limiting it to only people who are defined as extremely vulnerable. You know, I think from my perspective, I assume from yours and many, like if you are unhoused, you should have access to emergency shelter. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about a very defined list of highly vulnerable people. And I guess, you know, my 2 cents is that like if we're, you know, compromising on creating only these people will have access to the GEA program, you know, not to further compromise by saying, you know, the legislature has a million tools. If they need to raise new revenue, they can raise new revenue. If they need to kind of think about priorities, shifting spending priorities, they can do that. I mean, they have the money, they can find the money, they can pay for it. It's just the political will to do so. And so I think, you know, my hope is that like us as a group can come together and say, you know, we are the, you know, this group represents folks who have lived experience, the folks who are working on the ground, the folks who are working at it from the systems perspective, to kind of come together and say, you know, we're agreeing that these are the people who need to be sheltered, and the legislature, you all need to figure out how to make this happen. And we can't take no for an answer anymore because it's just too much harm that's happening, which I think legislators are seeing right now with the exits, you know, with that letter of 99 legislators calling on the governor to do something, many of whom, you know, voted for this bill last year to create the caps. I think seeing the repercussions. And so I guess my hope is that we can just kind of stand up to the legislature and say, this is what you need to do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. That's really helpful, Frank. Really good framing. I see Molly's hand up, and then I think we should begin sort of shifting conversation to notification and communication, just to make sure we're able to touch on that today. Go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, thank you. I won't be long. I just feel like I want to, I hear what you're saying, Frank, about, you know, not wanting to come at this from a place of scarcity. And I think that there is, you know, you can choose what kind of issue you want to compare it to as far as what the funding is. Where I'm coming from on this committee is I'm representing the Long-Term Care Crisis Coalition, which there's also a lot of funding that is needed for the long-term care system in our state that directly impacts some of these folks that are homeless, in that if they need assisted living or, you know, residential care homes, you know, there's wait lists and there's not enough Medicaid reimbursement. So there's not always such kind of stark comparisons to different priorities. Sometimes it's priorities within the same continuum, I guess. So I even think about, you know, permanent affordable housing. So how much goes to shelter versus how much goes to permanently affordable housing with place-based services. So I feel the need to, you know, say that I think that there has to be some realism in here about how big the pie is in Vermont, because I do think tough choices have to be made within the different options for this population that we're talking about, because their needs are different based on their ages, their abilities, that kind of thing. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Molly. I think,
Brenda has her
yeah.
hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brenda.
I just wanted to say that I think sometimes we're like, in this same population, like within the same population, we either have to do this for them or we have to do this for them, but then we fund something else. And so that's why I think it's really important to make recommendations of need, because as one of the providers that is standing on the ground, handing out tents and sleeping bags, and is dealing with clients who probably are needed long-term care with you. What is happening at this moment can't ever happen again. So I don't know if we need to do either or as much as we need to do both and figure out how, because the long-term cost of us allowing what's happening now or the way we've been doing it for the last is actually much higher. And so we have to decide when our investment is made and where our investment is made as a state. And so bringing to the legislature, these are our recommendations, and we need to make sure that also housing and also care is provided, rather than us fighting among priorities for the same population. I think the legislature is already aware that they need to do healthcare and they need to do that there's a lot of needs for the same population. And so making sure that we're proposing recommendation that doesn't cause more harm to the same population we're trying to help by funding something else. I don't think, like Amy said, we're starting over. The clients that are outside right now, if they survive until December 1st, which some of ours won't, if they survive until December 1st, we are going to have to start over with them. And that is more expensive long-term than it would be if the progress that we've made in the last year or year and a half or 2 years or 3 years, depending how long they've been our client, we could continue right now. So I lifting up what Frank said, and I know we have to move on. I just wanted to really say, like, we're really as a culture ready to fight with among our own group and our own priorities. And I think it's better if we lift up the needs and then let the legislature work on because I think we all come from different parts of the sector, and we're going to support those different parts of the sector. But we do, as a group, need to say, what does it need as a whole? Sorry, Sarah, I know you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I want to make sure that we have some time to talk about notification and communication here, because I think that is, I think that's a huge challenge around like how, we sort of talk about this program and ensuring that there is, awareness and that households and providers, kind of understand, changes to the program or new information or shifts. So I want to lead us into that piece of our discussion today. We have 30 minutes left, and I would propose that we spend between 15 and 20 minutes. I know that's not adequate, but we can certainly pick up in the future. So let's hear from folks who might have thoughts around communication and notification.
Shelby has her hand up.
Go ahead, Shelby.
Again. Okay, so this was another thing that we came up with a small proposal about, or it's part of this. So notification and communication, there's kind of 3 different things. Benefit award letters, that households will receive benefit award letters and will be notified in writing at each recertification of their benefit, their time remaining, recertification date, and any additional requirements that they need wait, what? Yeah, sorry. So they'll receive a benefit letter and will be notified writing at each recertification of their benefit, time remaining, recertification date, and any additional requirements that they need to complete. And all households will be given adequate time while remaining sheltered to meet any documentation requirements. ESC or AHS field services coordinators will provide to the local lead agency notifications for everyone's 6-month review. And then for program changes, that any changes to the program itself or benefit will be noticed with no less than 30 days notice, so that the households have the chance to both prepare and appeal decisions related to emergency housing. And then lastly, denial letters. That denial letters will be issued at each denial, and should a denial letter not be issued, there will be a 10-day grace period of shelter to allow notice of denial to the household.
Nicole, can you share with us what how this this proposal differs with current practice?
I can. And this might be a question I have as a point of clarification. Right now, the emergency housing program is what I would call an emergency program, where someone applies for benefits and is given a short-term duration, like usually it's 28 days of housing, and then they reapply and benefits are redetermined. Whereas this proposal, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, sounds to me like it's going to be an ongoing benefit program where households apply more similar to Reach Up or Three Squares, like once a year with a 6-month recert, where it's a more long-term ongoing program. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we were trying to direct it towards like applying for food stamps or Reach Up is because again, I agree that the emergency housing program should be more of a program and less of a benefit. But I think the importance being on that both when they first come with an emergency and get that short amount of time, that they do get a letter stating that, and that should include like, this is your 28-day, after this 28 days, this is what you can do. This is what is required of you if you need continued shelter. I know when I had an emergency with shelter, I was given, I think it was 28 days at first. And I was not told anything else about it. Like I just had no idea. I didn't know about renewals. I didn't know about any of it. And I don't think that's the fault of my caseworker, but just the process of how emergency housing was going. And I don't know if there is more notification now because of the day cap and the room cap. But I do think mainly focused on that they're notified of like exactly what this is and exactly what you need to do or can do when you start to come towards the end of this 28 days. Yeah.
So currently, so thank you. That was very helpful in helping me frame the rest of what I wanted to say. Currently, we don't provide a benefit notice when someone applies unless they specifically ask for that. We do provide written notice of denial. Anytime a household is denied, that's typically sent via email or mail or handed, depending on how the client's presenting and what their request is. I will say that when we have mailed letters in the past, many of them get returned to us. And so that has been a barrier in terms of mailing information to clients. But denial letters are mailed if the client doesn't have an email address they would like to access that denial notice through.
I have a question around, because I getting in touch with people is super challenging. I mean, I know their phone numbers change all the time, the addresses change all the time. Like this is just a challenge in general. has there been any thought given to like, I mean, I don't know, like, is there like an app or something that somebody can like easily have on their phone and like, send in their verification or recertify or receive, text notifications, or like, is there, how has there been, I know that like y'all at ESD are like using like a access database from like 1994 maybe. So I'm wondering like, is there any discussion around like how to incorporate technology into like the ways that people actually that people communicate? I didn't mean actually like it was like a, whatever, but I'm thinking like the school, like now I have like 2 different apps on my phone, and it's like one of them's around like the bus route changes and another one's around whatever, and I get notification. Like I'm just wondering, like, is there a way to like update our like communication with households to reflect that that's how people communicate nowadays, but also that, mailing something with a, to some, with a mailing address to somebody who doesn't have a mailing address, like really doesn't make sense.
I think technology is always possible. I will say that prior to September of 2023, just last year, we worked off an Excel spreadsheet in order to manage this program. We're not even in the incredibly outdated access system for this program. So
yeah,
we're at least a little bit further ahead technology-wise, but if things just take time to be built, and anything is possible with time and money in terms of
yeah.
technology.
Well, I will say that I was really impressed with the rapid stand up of that dashboard that was used. I know Dave Regal had a hand in that, but like that I mean, I think that like if there is, obviously it takes money and time for sure. I just wonder how we can kind of modernize our communication methods. Frank, go ahead, unless there's somebody in the room who has their hand up. I see Frank's hand up, and
Shelby's is up as well.
I just want to add real quick, not that that's not a good idea, but I know that the people that are eligible for emergency housing are a vulnerable population, and a lot of them have complex needs. I just would not want it to be that people have to rely on being able to use technology to access information or to upload documents. And about the mailing people things when they are homeless can be a big challenge, but we know where they are. We know what hotel they're at. And I think there are some hotels that will let people get packages and mails and whatever, and there's some that probably don't. But if it's something like a benefit letter or a notification from ESC, I highly doubt hotels would go against mailing those to the person at that hotel.
to be clear, I completely agree with you, Shelby. And I think even now, like people are, the free cell phones have gone with the Obama phones are gone now. So as people were calling them, so I was suggesting as a, not as one or the other, just as an option for somebody that might work better. Go ahead, Frank.
It's been a couple of years since I've followed this closely, but I know there had been a lot of research into how to engage unhoused people who are engaging in the criminal legal system, like with failure to appear notices, like people who are consistently failing to appear for court dates, using technology like text alerts and things like that, where they, like MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, put a lot of money and time into that. So there may be lessons learned from that. I mean, I'd be happy to kind of look into where that's at now and report back.
Frank, that would be, I think that would be super helpful. Thank you for offering to do that.
Brenda has her hand up too.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I'm just thinking that, so our proposal is not necessarily like this is what we do now. We do know that sometimes people don't get denial letters. We don't know why, and there's no judgment on the case manager or the reach up worker, or I'm sorry, or the housing benefits specialist that maybe doesn't provide that, but it does happen at times, and it makes it hard for, I think, legal aid or for End Homelessness Vermont when we're trying to support someone through a process, and probably other providers as well. And then, so that is part of that proposal. And then also just, it can't be a reason not to do it, that sometimes we can't get a hold of people when we provide a benefit letter. I think that there are, in many of these cases, there's an authorized representative, whether it's not always us, there's lots of providers who have that tool, and it can go to them. Additionally, there can be a way that we create a system so that we are sure that it's going to maybe multiple sources or another provider if the person's willing. We ask whenever we do an intake with a client, we ask for a phone number, an alternative phone number, email, what's their preference, text, email, or phone. And then we also ask them, is there someone else that we can leave a message with if we can't get a hold of you, like a family member or friend where you would reliably and consistently get information from them. Because in our work, because we're often there's communication challenges for a lot of our clients, we are having to get a hold of them consistently, and we can't not get a hold of them. So we have been able to successfully do that. And so I do think that there's models that work, and so I don't think I think that we shouldn't let that be a barrier. I don't think that that's what Sarah was suggesting at all, or what anyone was suggesting necessarily. But I have to say, I have to note that I do find it frustrating that there's a resistance to adding a benefits letter, because that's really, as someone in poverty who received a lot of benefits, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Shelby, but there is so much to keep track of when you're in poverty, way more than an average person has to keep track of, in terms of, and if you mess any of it up, something that you rely on for survival goes away. And so making sure that we're creating programs that are both flexible and understand the need, and actually give people knowledge, because knowledge is power, and allowing people to have real understanding of what's happening. Because I have certainly missed because I couldn't use a document uploader when I was first losing my eyesight, or struggling with my eyesight. I missed, for example, an EBT renewal. It's been a while, and therefore didn't have access to food. So I just want to really, those other two aspects are things that I think we are going to have a quicker agreement on, but adding a benefits letter is critical to the population that we're talking about right now.
I don't know that you're hearing pushback from that. I guess
maybe I just know that there is pushback to that. There has been, and it could be a technology issue, and therefore we just have to work around it. And so,
okay,
there's other stuff there.
Okay, yeah. Nicole, go ahead.
I think Brenda said what I was going to say, which was technology wise, we don't have the ability to create the letters right now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But you send the same letter to the hotel for every individual. Couldn't you adapt that form and just give it to the actual person?
Technology. We would need to revise something. Yes, the form that goes to the hotel is very different than what I think is being asked for here.
I'm not sure the form that's sent to the hotel staff and owners would be even understood by people in the program, because it uses so much systematic language that I think a lot of people in the program need kind of a simple outline of. But I do get your point as well, that there's already something being sent to the hotel for each person. Something could be added on to that without, I think, a huge difficulty.
I think, just gonna jump in. Also, just because the technology is a barrier, doesn't mean that we don't recommend something. Yes, so the technology is a barrier. So then it's our job as a legislature and to work with economic services and DCF. How do we overcome that barrier? So just because it is something that is hard, I think we can still recommend it because it is something, there are lots of technology issues that we need to tackle in a lot of areas of our state government, but I don't think it should, we shouldn't just not include it.
Thanks, Jubilee. Good point. Miranda, I see your hand up.
Thanks. Well, and I don't want to, I agree, Jubilee, we can put it in, and you're right. It's just the reality of something will be prioritized over something else, unfortunately, when it comes to technology. But what I was going to say too is just to make sure that I'm hoping we're all on the same page of like what economic services is communicating to a motel is not the same thing as what we would want to be communicating to an individual, nor should motels where businesses have that information about an individual, like how many days they've used, et cetera. Like when we're flipping things on our doors, they're like generic letters. We haven't, done like, go slip this under Miranda's door, because like that is information just for Miranda. So I think it is too, like we would need a solution that is making sure that we're not sharing information that others shouldn't be privy to.
I think that another piece of this, I feel like we have some good notes here, and I want to make sure that we have some time for planning. I think a piece of this while the communication to folks who are in the program is critical, I think there's also, kind of a component around communication, like broadly to service providers and communities when there are changes. And, I think that that feels like an important piece that we haven't necessarily discussed, and so I would really like to have more conversation around that. However, I do want to keep us to time today. We have about 10 minutes left here, and I'm hoping that we can summarize some next steps and set a time and confirm a time and date for our next meeting. Okay. Starting from the beginning, I can summarize what I heard today. Tell me if I'm wrong. I've been taking a lot of big notes here. We heard from Jubilee around expanding eligibility to include youths / young adults exiting from foster care up to age 20, not 24, 23, I think you said. If there are no YDP resources, we also heard that Jubilee will be gathering some data around what this number actually looks like from a statewide basis. We created a list of areas where there is some broad consensus minus a few organizations who are sort of want to see this as a full package, which I totally understand, including the administration. We have created a small list of things where that still require additional discussion, and Frank will be working on creating a spreadsheet for us to review as a group, so we can kind of identify sort of where there is agreement, what we have left to work on, and begin to really kind of chip away at determining what the proposal might look like for the eligibility criteria. We talked about lengths of eligibility. Shelby, Brenda, and Amy shared a proposal that they would like, that has served as a really helpful place to sort of start conversation. And I'm hoping that we can include that with the minutes today. And I would love to kind of see that and have some time to digest it a little bit. We talked about data sets that might be helpful. Should the recommendation be to incorporate a length of stay criteria. we also talked about the importance of service provider capacity and how to expand that both from a workforce perspective and a funding perspective. And then we have sort of talked a little bit about communication and technology challenges and where improvement can happen there. And still to come is discussion around communication with households in terms of written communication, different technology platforms for communication and communication with community, with the community providers. We did a lot in 3 hours, you guys. What have I missed in that summary? And Monica, I know you're taking notes here, and I hope that's somewhat helpful for you. And I know some folks had to kind of pop in and pop out. Are there important things that we've missed, that I've missed in that sort of overview and reflection?
I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
Right on. All right. I like that. Okay, so let's look ahead to our next meeting would be regularly scheduled on October 29th. The time right now is from 9 to 10. I'm not sure if there are conflicts. I don't have any on my schedule particularly. I'm not sure if there are conflicts with other folks' schedules. And we have talked about extending to from 2 hours to 3 hours. So I think we're looking for a 3-hour block on the 29th of October.
Brenda?
It is, sorry.
Yeah.
It is way better for us. We are trying to be in the room and we are coming from Southern Vermont. It would be great if it's this later time is way easier for us to make that happen.
Yeah.
The 11.
And Shelby has a baby.
11 to 2?
Yes.
Does
And
11 to
hopefully this room where I can see.
Okay. Does 11 to 2 work for everyone on October 29th?
Does it not work?
Molly, go ahead. Oh, Molly, I'm not able to hear you for some reason. Molly, thumbs up or thumbs down? Does the 29th from 11 to 2 work for you? Oh, thumbs down. Okay.
I also think
out
it would
of
be
time.
helpful
Thanks, Molly.
to know of these future meetings, like if we could start to do this confirmation in advance, because I think that some of these are then going to be voting meetings. And so, for instance, I think it's not that we don't want everyone to always be here, but it's sort of one thing if I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling good, maybe I need to just like stay home and listen versus like, oh no, we're voting today, I really need to come. So just maybe something else as you work on the schedule to like look ahead so we can get all the meetings kind of finalized and really specify which ones are voting, so that if, for instance, next week is a voting meeting and Molly's out of town, do we then make a change, or not, or at least give Molly then the ability to make sure she has a delegate that is prepared to then do that?
I think it's pretty safe to assume we will be voting at all of we only have a few more left, that they will all probably be voting meetings. Molly did write she's going to have someone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think also if things could be shared in advance, that's really helpful, because a lot of us are not just here as individuals. Some of us are, but some of us aren't. So I think needing time to then check and make sure that we have collected the input we need to collect.
I'm just curious, are you all reading the minutes as they're posted on the website? Because Monica does a great job of getting those out right after the meeting, and they're posted usually within a couple days of our meetings. Are you finding the notes to be helpful in kind of, what we talked about and sort of what our next steps are for planning? Lily, or are you looking for more? I mean, obviously we talked today about Frank establishing and working on this spreadsheet. So that will be in addition, but are you finding the minutes to not be helpful in that? What would be helpful?
Yeah, I think what Frank's working on today, where it's very clear for which charge and what is the specific language that like, is this the recommendation language or not, versus more like capturing a discussion. I agree that I think the minutes are very helpful, but I think separate from the minutes, if we start to develop, and again, I think Frank's doing that today, which I appreciate, like really, what is the language? What is the charge it's associated with? Where is the big picture? Again, what are the things that maybe we're saying we're not going to be voting on because we don't think we have capacity, versus like, okay, we're voting on these two things at the next meeting. So then again, someone can make an informed decision of like, I abstain right now because I want to see what we talk about at next meeting. Like, I just think that could be a helpful path for the next few meetings, because I agree. I think they're going to be pretty focused.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a look at the spreadsheet that Frank comes up with, and kind of, look at that in the context of, decision making. And then I think that it would be helpful for us to, map out, like you're saying, the next few meetings, and to be really clear on the decision points. I feel like from my perspective, Jubilee, I don't know about you, but I've been hesitant to like micromanage this group in that way. But if that would be helpful to folks, then we can, add a, layer of, I guess, more structure to the last few meetings.
We'll send, I think we kind of, the urgency and time crunch kind of necessitates that, but we'll be proactive on sending out materials before the meeting so you can review them, have your people review them as well, and have time to formulate thoughts, opinions, or suggestions for changes.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining today and for discussion. And I look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks, if not before. Have a good day.
Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.